I call on the member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, I'd like to focus on the present, rather than reading off some archaic tablet about the history of education in Queensland, and commend this notice of motion, because we have to recognise Queensland teachers for the great work they do, and there's no better example of that than a Bayside initiative, the Bayside Excellence in Teaching Alliance. This is government and non-government schools working together to further the profession of teaching, to establish a network of teachers who meet together to talk about the advances in teaching, and also a collegial dialogue to allow them to talk about the great challenges that this great profession faces. Now, we're expecting teachers from scores of schools in the Bayside area, and attendance is already overflowing. And I think it will be a very, very successful meeting when it happens next week. Unfortunately, these wonderful, talented teachers exist in a system that is not only broken but broke. And I want to just highlight the recent initiative to build 7 schools in Queensland by a state government that actually has no money at all. So instead of embarking on a public-private partnership, they embarked on a private handover of structural debt because there simply is no public money to add to the solution anymore. And this structured debt arrangement to build 7 schools, including one in my electorate, for a total cost of around $300 million in today's dollars, will cost the Queensland taxpayer $1.1 billion over 30 years because this decrepit state government could not find any private partner to fund it. Every bank consortia failed to fund it completely, and in the end they had to turn to a construction company to buy that commercial debt. This is the saddest of days in funding education because, quite simply, to those on the other side, the 30 years it will take to pay off this debt will see the students today 40-year-old parents with children of their own and potentially grandkids before those structured debt arrangements are paid off. The Bligh government will pay off 2 instalments over 2 years before that Bligh government goes to an election, and they'll leave the other 28 instalments to governments of the future to pay off. This Bligh government is artificially hiding their debt. This Bligh government is artificially not funding schools the way they should, and they're abrogating their responsibility to provide schools in my electorate. Now, let's get the record straight, Mr Deputy Speaker. There is no getting around the NAPLAN scores. There is no getting around the fact that this Premier, Anna Bligh, was the Education Minister from 2001 to 2005. And what were the scores after 5 years of smart state under this Premier? Reading, lowest in the country. Writing, lowest in the country. Grammar, lowest in the country. Bullying, highest in the country. Numeracy, lowest in the country. Punctuation, lowest in the country. There's no getting around that, Deputy Speaker. There's no getting around the lack of funding in the area. And the one thing that is absolutely startling and shines like a light is the flurry of excuses that has come out of this administration. And we've had ever-increasing attempts to explain away this fall in outcomes for Queensland students by being a reflection of age and maturity and not having a prep year and every imaginable excuse. But what we are left with are committed teachers fighting for what they know is right in a condition where principals are not given the autonomy and the independence and the power to make their schools a better place. I phoned one of my principals and I said, give me a rough idea of how much you can spend in a discretionary way on your school. And they said, in a discretionary way, the money that I can actually devote to maintenance in my school, I'm a band 4 to 5 school. Andrew, my budget is about $20,000 to $25,000 a year to spend on maintenance. And that is an enormous shame. Because if you take that figure, Deputy Speaker, and apply it to this structured debt arrangement, which is theft, it is theft and it's transfer of resources straight to the private sector for schools that this state administration cannot build. And it's good to see a Queensland MP here tonight facing that music, because that arrangement is simply transferring $700 million into the private sector for the privilege of hiding debt on behalf of the government. And that is the shame. That is the shame that this government that claimed a $15 billion GFC-induced bailout now discovers that it's $2.7 billion, but they will still sell off all of those assets, the Port of Brisbane, the motorways, the rail, the forestry. Pooh, that's all gone, like a puff. All of the dividends for the future lost for our children and our grandchildren. All of that built on a GFC-induced case that simply isn't a deficit whatsoever. All we have is debt, mismanagement, and the teachers and principals in the Queensland state system that suffer as a result of that Bligh administration.